I am excited about starting this new course. I will just call it Climate and Health, which is obviously a big concern, a popular topic of research and education. And in practice, it's been known since the time of Hippocrates, 2500 BC, that it was not Satan or demon that was causing ill health, but it was environmental factors. This, I will use multiple books, but I will start with this one by Anthony McMichael, who unfortunately passed away a few years ago in 2014, an Australian doctor, epidemiologist, educator, and wrote lots of nice papers and books. His idea is slightly different than many other books, where the general approach is to take environmental factors like temperature, air quality, water quality, precipitation, and then try to relate them to disease outcomes for various things like diarrhea, typhoid, meningitis, cholera, and so on, malaria, and then try to make solutions based on individual exposure, vulnerabilities, etc. Whereas Tony McMichael tries to make an argument that we have to have a historic perspective. This is kind of David Christian's approach of big history, let's say, where to understand human beings you literally have to go back to the Big Bang. So the idea here is to think of human ecology, where how humans have always interacted with the environment and how the environment affected human evolution, human health, human culture, etc. So we will run through few ideas from this book and then move on to more traditional approaches in the context of global warming. Okay, so this is called Climate Change and the Health of Nations, Famine, Fevers, and the Fate of Populations. So it's a focus on health of the population, societies, communities, rather than necessarily individuals. And there is the introduction in the first chapter is the build up to going into how climate the variability is a big factor. So if we look at the last 11,000 years during which the modern human being has evolved since the end of the last ice age, and the idea is that climate has remained relatively stable. So if we look here as the anomaly, temperature variation relative to this base period of 1961 to 1990, the maximum amplitude of change going from the so-called Holocene optimum about 7,000 years ago to the end of the Little Ice Age, where the global temperatures were coldest. There are details here that I'm not going to get into. That is about 0.7 degrees centigrade, but since Industrial Revolution, human activities, fossil fuel burning emissions have increased the temperature from that baseline by almost 1 degree centigrade, or 1.8 or so degree Fahrenheit, and we have emitted over 500 gigatons of carbon, or you can convert it to CO2 of almost 1800 or so, I think, gigatons. You can look that up. So the idea is that the impact of climate on humanity has always been part of the story, and we can look at specific examples like this. The 500-year Roman warm, particularly temporary northward excursion of the Mediterranean climate zone in Europe, that facilitated the Roman Empire's expansive phase by, for instance, boosting agricultural productivity. So climate, food, water, air, and health have always been connected together, as well as energy. Energy consumption is now the big part of why climate change is happening, but that also relates directly to health and also indirectly. The wild rodent expansion in Central Asia around 1300 CE Common Era associated with climatic change, setting in motion the sequence of events leading to outbreaks of bubonic plague in China and subsequent epidemics in Europe in the 1340s, which killed millions of people. The influence early in the 17th century Europe of the unusually cold and wet wet weather on food crisis, starvation, deaths, epidemics, social disorder, conflict and warfare, most notably the chaotic 30 Years' War. So the idea is that it's not just about El Nino bringing more malaria or cholera, and monsoon creating diarrheal diseases and so on and so forth, and global warming, heat waves creating health issues. But this run through of human evolution at all time scales with the interactions of climate change and health through food and water and direct and indirect. So this is a schematic from one of earlier books by Tony. We'll call him Tony. He was known that way. So climate change has direct impacts on human health, injury, death, mental stress, heat stress, deaths, infectious diseases, vector-borne and other, undernutrition, mental stress disorders and trauma deaths. And there is indirect influences on natural biophysical systems from glaciers, rivers, ocean temperatures, pH, acidity, sea level rise, nitrogen, phosphorus cycles, soils, forests, coasts, biodiversity, and so on, which influence social and economic conditions, property loss, job loss, displacements, sources of conflicts, and here. So mental stress, for example, is a big problem associated with not just direct impacts of climate change, but the anxiety about what climate change may do to the human society. There are influences on biological and ecological processes, ecological changes, food yields, water quality, mosquito populations, and indirect and diffuse impacts mediated by changes to environment and social systems. You will find other depictions of this idea of how climate change cascades into human health. There is some noise being made outside. I hope it's not affecting the recording. Anyways, to go back to longer time scales of human ecology, how humans, human ancestors and environment have influenced each other, we can look at over the last 10 million years or so. So this is millions of years ago, time going back here to forward. So we use various evidences which you can look up in my other courses on the channel. There is a course called Earth's Climate, Past, Present and Future, which provides the details on how these are done. So we've had cold, so if you start here, we were in a warm period, and then we had less fluctuating climate, but you have to be careful because as you go back in time, the records become less resolved in time as well. As you come forward, there is higher frequencies and different amplitudes as well as frequencies of climate change. And we have our ancestors here, Ardipithecus, Australopithecus, Paranthropus, Homo lineages. And I will go into the details of how things evolved in terms of the brain size, bipedalism, fingers, opposable thumbs, and skill in using the hands, mastering fire, walking on two legs, increased brain size, language, depictions of images, paintings, cave